You watched my basic formal logic translation video. You saw the example of if you're taking an international flight, then you have a passport, how that transformed into the shorthand of international flight, arrow, passport. As I said in that video, you could be writing it shorter, IF to P, but I went ahead and included a couple extra letters just to make sure it's clear what that order is. Contrapositives. What the heck is that? A contrapositive is a synonym. It's just another way of saying the exact same thing. Now, why do we care about knowing that on the LSAT? It's because the test makers like to hide right answers from you. In fact, if you've done any studying for this exam, I'm sure you've seen multiple instances where the right answer did not use the words that you expected. Where formal logic is concerned, a contrapositive is just a way for the test maker to hide it from you. To create a contrapositive, you're going to do three things, or at least you're going to check for three things. The first two you're always going to be doing, and the last one will only happen if there's an and an or present. So first things first, we want to swap sides. Since the PAS, the passport, was previously on the right side, it's now going to go on the left side. International flight was previously on the left. Now it's going to be on the right. So we'd get to passport, then international flight. Now notice that this by itself is not necessarily true. Just because you have a passport, that doesn't guarantee you're going to be taking an international flight. Hopefully, but we don't know. We then also need to swap positive negative. Now, so far, everything has been positive. International flight, passport, those things happening. So now we need to make it negative. To make it negative, we're going to include a tilde. The tilde is a fast way of writing the concept of not. You could write the full word not, but that would take some time. So it's faster to just use the tilde. Same deal here, tilde, because both statements were originally positive, so now they're going to need to be negative within that contrapositive. Also, when you're writing formal logic, it's usually a good idea to line up your arrows to make it easy to see what those first terms are, those if terms, because those are the ones that lead to more information. So the complete contrapositive here would be if you do not have a passport, then you are not taking an international flight. And notice how that concept makes sense. It makes sense because if you don't have a passport, you can't take an international flight, because if you were taking an international flight, you'd have to have a passport. So if you don't have a passport, and it goes just, in that spiral. So again, contrapositive, just another way of saying the same thing. It's generally going to be useful to go ahead and write contrapositives for any formal logic statements you get in logic games. Logical reasoning, you can create them when you need them. Now, you might be wondering about that last thing we're supposed to do with contrapositives, swapping and or. Again, there was no and or in this particular statement. But let's say you had a formal logic statement that was something along the lines of if X, then Y and Z. So let's say that was our shorthand. We had created that shorthand for the given formal logic statement. To make the contrapositive, pause this video, try to make the contrapositive on your own, and then restart it when you're ready. Good to have you back. Let's think about how we're going to translate this. So both the Y and the Z are now going to be on the left-hand side. The X is going to be over here on the right-hand side. Everything was initially positive, having an X, having a Y, having a Z. So we're now going to need to turn all of these negative. So not having a Y, not having a Z, not having an X. Now we started the original formal logic with an and. So that means when we're creating the contrapositive, we got to swap that to an or. So we actually should have an or between that Y and Z. Also, as I mentioned previously, it's a good idea to line up your arrows like so. So we end up with our original statement of if X, then Y and Z, contrapositive. If you don't have a Y or you do not have a Z, then you will not have an X. One last thing, you might be wondering, why do we need to make the change? Why couldn't we just keep it if Y and not Z, then no X? Isn't that true? Yes. And let's put this in the context that might make it easier to understand. Let's say the original was if X goes to the party, then Y and Z will go to the party too. So X at party, Y and Z also at party. Well, if X requires both Y and Z to be there, yes, it's true that if both Y and Z did not show up, then X would not show up. But it's also true that if either one of Y or Z couldn't go to the party, then X would not be going to the party because X needs both of them to go. So that's why we really need that or there. That helps remind us that just knowing that Y isn't going would be enough to know that X is not going, or just knowing that Z is not going would be enough to know that X is not going. And yes, knowing that both of them are not going would also be enough. This also means something important about the word or. Or means one or the other or both of them on the LSAT, whereas and always means both.